We've already formed a quorum. Please invite the guests to come in.
OK， 咁我哋要留返2個人喺度，好唔好啊？OK， 好，阿傑哥，你可唔可以去先啊？你去先好，對唔住，因為而家嗰邊 development 又開緊。
We're sorry, the panel on development is also having a meeting and they don't have a quorum. So some of our members have to go there as well because both rooms do not have a quorum. Welcome, Secretary, Under Secretary, Permanent Secretary, and so forth. I don't want to spend time on introducing all of you because we all know one another. Now today we're on Chapter 2, Implementation of Air Quality Improvement Measures. Today's lead member is Mr. Kenneth Leung. Before we start, any declaration of interest? I have to declare that I'm the non-executive director of First New World with City Bus and First Bus under it. Kenneth, would you please introduce Chapter 2 to us? You have 15 minutes, and after you we'll have Paul and then Hakan, and then Alan. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, colleagues from the administration. In the last 2 public hearings, when we're on Chapter 1, we already discussed air pollution, and today we'll focus on Chapter 2, Implementation of Air Quality Improvement Measures. Members will recall that at the last meeting, we mentioned the monitoring stations and the AQIs. And we have over 170 days with the API at higher than 100. That's very high. Now, for air quality improvement measures, they're actually the major concern of the people of Hong Kong, and we would like to do something in this regard. First of all, I'd like to invite members and colleagues to read the audit report. May I refer you to paragraph 2.2. A, B, C, D, E set out various pollutants, 7 of them, and which have been exceeding the limits continuously, and some at a very serious level. For nitrogen oxides, for example, we have 1-hour measurements and 24-hour measurements. Before I ask questions on Chapter 2, I'd like to ask the administration to update us on certain circumstances. In November 2005, the audit published report number 44. And in that report, something is mentioned about the Audit's concern about control measures on diesel vehicles, and some recommendations were made. I understand that after the publication of the 2005 audit report in September 2006, there were some responses from the Bureau and some measures had been proposed. I'd like the officials to inform us that since 2006, what follow-up actions were taken on report number 44. May I refer the officials to R59 Gen 2 /Info 32. That's about report number 44. Mr. Leung raised this just now. R59 /2 /Info 32. Have you got that? Have you got that? Yes? All right. Who will answer this? Would you please raise your hands? Because we have many people today, we have many guests today. Andrew? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Concerning the emission control for diesel vehicles, after the completion of the audit report, we had got new measures. Here, I'd like to refer members to Appendix D of Chapter 2. Appendix D sets out what the administration has implemented from 1997 to 2011 in terms of emission control measures. In 2007, we launched a number of measures to control diesel vehicular emission. In 2007, for example, all newly registered vehicles have to comply with Euro 4 emission standards. So since 2007, all newly imported diesel vehicles will have to satisfy the Euro 4 standards. For pre-Euro vehicles, they must be retrofitted with the particulate reduction devices, and we offer concessionary duty rate for Euro 5 vehicle diesel. And then in the ensuing few years, members can refer to that appendix for the details. And in June 2012, we launched a new measure. All newly imported vehicles, the emission standards should be Euro 5. So for emission control for new vehicles, we've actually moved another step forward. Kenneth? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Has he answered your question, Kenneth? Well, I can see that the Bureau and the Department have adopted certain measures. However, how effective these measures are, that's the focus of this inquiry on Chapter 2, and we'd like to find facts. May I refer you to Audit Report, Figure 1, page 6 of the Chinese version. We're now about land vehicular emission. Now from this figure, you can see three main pollutants: sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and PM. For land transport, the percentage of pollution of nitrogen oxides is 30%. For PMs, RSPs, 21% from transport, quite a high percentage. We also know that since the year 2000, the administration has launched various subsidy schemes to support the industry in replacing vehicles, retrofitting vehicles, or install filters. For these various subsidy schemes, you can see from paragraph 2.8 of the report, 4 major schemes for taxis, public light buses, and 2 other schemes in 2007 and 2010 to subsidize diesel vehicles such that they can be replaced. Now, may I ask something about paragraph 2.8a, LPG taxi scheme? Apparently, this scheme is more successful. If you read figure 2, you see the information more easily. For the scheme 2000, after its launching, the number of taxis, 18,138 taxis, about 99.8% changed to LPG. That's actually in table 2. I would like to know whether or not all taxis are now LPG taxis. Who will answer this? Mr. Loh? Is it Mr. Loh first? From our records, we know that 2 diesel taxis are still operating. After we've introduced the LPG taxi scheme, we have amended our legislations to the effect that all new taxis will have to use petrol or LPG. So for these 2 diesel taxis, when they're replaced, they have to use LPG or petrol. Any other colleagues from the administration? No? Kenneth? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So now in Hong Kong, how many LPG filling stations are there? And are there any other schemes to increase the number of LPG filling stations? Mr. Chairman, the total number of LPG filling stations is 50 odd, almost 60. Overall speaking, they can serve for all taxis and minibuses. That is, if they are to be converted to LPG, there will be sufficient filling services. In order that our LPG filling network can be expanded to serve taxis and LPGs, we launched a policy in the year 2000. That is, for new LPG filling station sites, so long as safety requirements are met, for all petrol filling stations, so long as the requirements are met, LPG filling services should also be provided. Now, Mr. Chairman, in the next 2 to 3 years, how many more LPG filling stations shall we have? Do you have any figure? Mr. Loh? Mr. Chairman, I do not have the concrete figures here. In the next few years, we'll have a number of petrol filling station sites for bidding, for tendering. I can provide you with information. Yes, please provide us with the information on the location of these LPG filling station sites. Mr. Leung? I have a technical question, Mr. Chairman. May I refer you to 2.88, paragraph 2.88. Look at the last 2 lines of that paragraph. It said there that the replacement of all diesel taxis by LPG ones contributed to an estimated reduction of 6% of roadside nitrogen oxides and 25% of roadside PM10 emissions. Now we have the figures here. but I think carbon monoxide has also been reduced. So apart from nitrogen oxides and PM10, any other reduction? Mr. Chairman, perhaps I should explain a little bit more on roadside pollution before I answer Mr. Leung's question on carbon monoxide. Were you referring to carbon monoxide or nitrogen oxide? Carbon monoxide, CO. Now for roadside pollution, the major pollutants are RSPs and nitrogen oxides. In Hong Kong, the CO problem is rather light. Our emission level is quite low. And even for the WHO, its ultimate guidelines for CO set a level higher than ours. We're only 1/10 of the set level. So we do not target CO, but NOs and PMs. Because for vehicular emission, the main pollutants emitted are nitrogen oxides and particulates. CO emitted is rather low. For LPG vehicles, they don't have any advantage over diesel vehicles insofar as carbon monoxide is concerned.
And
it's because of this reason, therefore, we want to replace diesel taxis with LPG taxis to improve roadside pollution. I still have one follow-up question on LPG taxis. If members refer to page 18, paragraph 2.11, it refers to emission reduction devices wear out in about 18 months, whether it is in taxis or light buses. If they are worn out, the vehicle emission will increase at least 10 times. So I'm concerned. When these vehicles are examined by the traffic department, have they inspected these emission reduction devices? And when they need to be replaced, how much does it cost? Another question is, if these emission reduction devices have malfunctioned, do we require them to replace these devices before their license is renewed? Mr. MOK? When we introduced the LPG vehicles, we had cooperated with the Transport Department colleagues in their annual inspection work. We had, at the time, there was a common practice in Japan in emission inspections. But as technology improved, we see that certain vehicle inspection techniques can also inspect LPG vehicle nitrous oxide emissions, and therefore recently we received approval from LegCo where the worn-out emission reduction devices, and we received funding from the LegCo Finance Committee to deal with that. So we will assist the taxis, the light buses owners to replace their catalysts once it's a catalyst that needs to be replaced. After that, we can use a remote roadside monitoring device to monitor these LPG vehicles. We'll also inspect petrol vehicles. If there are excessive emissions, we will require the vehicle owner to remedy the situation. Otherwise, the vehicle license will be struck off. So we can now monitor the nitrous oxide emissions. I have a question. These catalysts, how much do these cost? We have done an estimate. It also depends on the size of the vehicle. It's about $1,000 for taxis. So taxis, if they need to replace the catalyst, it will cost them $1,000 odd. Yes, if it's worn out, they need to replace it. Paul, I'd like to refer to Table 2. Mr. MOK said we have 2 diesel taxis, and it's a very successful scheme. But it's not that successful with light buses. And one reason was that diesel taxis there was a change in the legislation, and taxis cannot be diesel powered. So has there been a similar legislation for public light buses? If not, why not? PLBs run on fixed routes. When we introduced the LPG scheme, we had a discussion with the industry, and some light bus routes didn't have refilling stations. It wasn't because the government didn't want to install the refilling stations, but it was hard to find or to locate a LPG station in the downtown area. And the administration decided that the legislation should not extend from taxis to PLBs. Mr. MOK also said that there are some 50-60 LPG refilling stations, and it should handle all the PLBs and taxis. Is that capacity or actual, or can it meet actual demand? And how does it answer the route question mentioned just now? I referred to a quantity issue. Let's say they all use LPG, then the gas supply can meet the demand. So if you have sufficient capacity, but if in fact, if you do not meet the industry's practical needs, if there are insufficient incentives to convert to LPG, then how does that address the underlying question? Well, from the environment perspective, we would like all PLBs to use LPG, but there is a practical issue. That is, a lot of these PLB routes are operating in dense areas. The reality tells us that it's hard to identify locations for LPG refilling stations. And because of these objective criteria, we cannot require all PLBs to use LPG. That's because of the reality. Do you require the Secretary to answer a policy? The Secretary? So policy-wise, how would you deal with this question, Secretary? Do you accept the current reality that you cannot identify LPG refilling stations in the downtown area? Well, my colleague had described PLBs running on diesel, and if they were to convert to LPG, there is sufficient gas supplied, but there are some geographic restrictions that cannot allow fixed route PLBs to convert to LPG. But policy-wise, we are concerned about these diesel vehicles, including PLBs. So I think we'll come up with some new solutions to accelerate the scrapping of diesel vehicles, and we should have suitable vehicle substitute and a suitable infrastructure. Thank you, Secretary. We are looking for answers, not proposals on the distant future in 1, 2, 3, or 4 years. You have to outline some concrete ideas because we need to file a report. We cannot leave a question mark there. So please provide some specific details. Well, you can pledge your efforts to seeking a solution. Yes, we'll do so later. So when you look at 2002 to 2005, we have a 54% of PLB conversion to LPG. So does that mean from 05, our hands have been tied behind our backs, and even the Secretary cannot come up with a concrete answer? So does it mean you are without any ideas? You've taken office some 4 or 5 months. Perhaps you can share some of your thoughts, and you can provide a report. We are developing some plans and will report them duly. The roadside pollution is from old diesel vehicles. We have some very old vehicles, and they make up the major polluters. And we are trying to target the source. And we'll announce some policies at the appropriate time, including PLBs. But the question now is focusing on PLBs. We are currently trying to focus on PLBs because there's only a 54% conversion rate from diesel to LPG. Could you share your thoughts? Ms. Wong can correct me if I'm wrong. After joining the government, were there more diesel PLBs can be converted has not been discussed. Doesn't mean we're not concerned, but PLBs, is there any room for further conversion to LPG? Yes, we can revisit this issue. You can provide a report. I have to thank Ms. Christine Loh for very honest replies. But I'd like to ask, if taxis are successful, PLBs are half successful, that it seems that commercial vehicles are very disappointing. In 2007, there was a 29% conversion, whether it was Euro 1 or pre-Euro. And in 2010 scheme, it only has 11% success rate. So I'd like to ask, since the 07 scheme, since it wasn't that successful, it only had a 29% success rate, then it seems that there should be larger incentives for older vehicles. So why don't we extend the 07 scheme before we tackle the 2010 scheme? In 07, after the scheme was completed, there was about a 30% conversion, where they were upgraded to Euro 4 or Euro 5 diesel. The government was subsidizing Euro 2 vehicles, and in 07 we had discussed the aging fleet that had not been converted. If there was a incentive scheme, if we were to extend the scheme, it might not be effective, and it might not encourage drivers to convert to LPG. So besides an incentive scheme, we also wanted, besides a carrot, we also wanted a stick, and we had suggested whether we should increase the license registration fee for old vehicles. So we would have a carrot and a stick, so to encourage vehicle owners to convert, but we did not garner the council support. We had started and wanted to continue with the momentum, so we implemented Euro 2 incentive scheme. I appreciate your focus on momentum. So the target in 07 was Euro 1 pre-Euro vehicles, because they would be polluting more than Euro 2. That's true. We have not forgotten about Euro 1 pre-Euro vehicles. We have not forgotten about them. But if we were to introduce a stick scheme, it would be very controversial. We had suggested increasing licensing, registration, and it was quite a divisive idea. Well, we are willing to look at it again, and but we could also float some incentive schemes, and it was supported by the council, and therefore we had implemented a Euro 2. I agree that the carrot is more useful than the stick, but this Euro 1 scheme only had a 30% success rate. Had you examined the reasons Was there insufficient sponsorship? Was there a time constraint? There wasn't sufficient incentives. And if you extended Euro 1, it might strengthen the incentives. And it might be more successful than 2010 Euro 2 scheme. Chairman, the 07 scheme, we had communicated with the industry. Of course, the larger the incentive, the bigger the take-up rate. And it's still an incentive scheme. Vehicle owners consider a basket of factors. There's a government subsidy, and they would also consider their commercial considerations. So just relying on the subsidy scheme might not achieve our substitution aim. So at the same time, besides incentives, we also want these relevant stick measures, and that needs society support. Andrew, let me respond. If you refer to Table 2, why is the take-up rate lower than the PLB and taxi? There are two reasons. So, incentives. In converting PLB and taxis, why do they have a high take-up rate? Even though it's about 20% of the cost of a new vehicle. But in PLB and taxis, if they convert from diesel to LPG, in taxis, they will save on fuel costs. And 10 years ago, they would save some 40,000.
So the taxi drivers will do their calculations. If they convert their taxis to a new model, then within 3 to 4 years, they're able to break even. So they will have higher incentive to convert or change their vehicles. But for diesel vehicles, because of technical constraints, for example, trucks or heavy goods vehicles, there's no other choice for them. Apart from diesel vehicles, there's no LPG or electric vehicles for them to enjoy long-term fuel savings. So in terms of incentives, diesel vehicles will see weaker incentive. As our permanent secretary and secretary said, in terms of the regulation measures for the LPG taxi scheme, at that time there was a legislative amendment. For all newly imported taxis to Hong Kong, they can no longer be diesel vehicles. They must be LPG or petrol taxis. And this time, or at that time, if they did not take part in the voluntary conversion scheme in the future, if they change vehicles, they will have to bear the whole amount of expenses. So in that case, there is a stick at the end. So they are more motivated to make a decision before the deadline. Concerning the diesel vehicle conversion scheme, it is on a voluntary basis. So if the suppression measures are not effective, then there is the basic reason behind the low take-up ratio. Can we ask the Transport Bureau to supplement? The Environment Bureau is facing a problem. No one is taking the carrot, so are you beating them up with the stick? Chairman, let me make a few points and then my colleagues can supplement. From the Transport Department's point of view, on one hand, there are buses. There are quite a lot of buses on the road. As a result, traffic congestion is caused and roadside air quality is affected. Now, for franchise buses, the maximum age allowed is 18 years. And we encourage the operator to update their fleet as much as possible. And they should use vehicles with the highest environmental standards. In April, we approved the franchises for New World and Lanzhou bus operator. And then we asked that whenever possible, they must procure the most environment-friendly and technically feasible and available buses in the market. In 2010, for buses that they newly acquired, these buses are Euro 5 or higher models. And there are still buses that are not up to this standard, but we expect that in 2019, all Euro 2 buses or below will be phased out. As our Environment Bureau colleague said, for the vehicle owners or operators, their considerations are also those considerations for franchise buses. They have to consider the cost of conversion and whether or not they are able to find the right supply. I will defer to my Transport Department colleagues to supplement. Commissioner, Chairman, thank you. Let me supplement. Let me talk about the minibuses and why there are still minibuses that have not reached satisfactory emission standards. In 2007, actually, Mr. Paul just asked about the subsidy scheme in 2007, and minibuses should reach Euro 4 standards. But after actual operation, the minibus trade identified two overseas manufacturers of minibuses, and there are some operational problems in the Euro 4 minibuses. So the manufacturer has used a diesel particulate filtering technique, and in the operation of the buses, the particulates in the emission will be collected, and then the particulates will also be burnt. If the particulates are not totally burned, then the engine, the motor, will send signals to the bus driver, and then the bus driver at appropriate times has to stop the vehicles and restart the engine. The trade is of the view that the damage rate is rather high, and there is some kind of downtime for the minibuses. And as a result, there is higher maintenance expenses. So these minibuses are not attractive. But technology is advancing. There are different types of vehicles that are driven by electricity in the market. While technology continues to advance in the future, this problem can be gradually resolved. Can you comment on buses? You just talked about minibuses. What about buses? As our secretary said, based on our agreement with the bus companies, before the 18th birthday of the buses have to be retired. But then concerning the bus fleets in the coming 5 years, there'll be the peak of bus exchange or replacement. There are 3,000 buses that need to be replaced, and they will have to replace these buses with bus models with the highest emission performance. And then for the bus companies, they are actively trying the electric buses in the market. They have bought some buses for trial run. These buses cannot be commissioned yet, but they are willing to take part in the pilot scheme. So in the coming 5 to 6 years, the emission performance of the buses will be very different from now. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Christine? Just now, Mr. Tse asked a very important question. What lessons have we learned from the past schemes? As you all know, we're going to introduce new schemes. So we know what we need to do. As said just now, we have to offer incentive, i.e. the carrot. The carrot must be big enough However, if the carrot is big, then I would request that there must be a stick. Otherwise, taxpayers will be paying a lot of money. But if the scheme is a voluntary one, then within a short period of time, you may not be able to see fast replacement of the vehicles. That is one lesson we have learned. Number 3, we have to fully understand how the trade sees this matter, especially those who are about to replace their vehicles. There are different types of vehicles, for example, big trucks, minibuses. They are different. So we have to fully understand all these. Number 3, if you want them to replace vehicles within a certain period of time, then we have to understand the supply of those vehicles. And who will get the money? Who will be able to pocket the incentives? The trade has given their views, saying that the manufacturers will raise the price, and in that case, they will take up some of the incentives. Okay, so these are lessons that we have learned when we formulate new policies. Very soon we'll be doing that. We have already learned these lessons. Christine, you have brought up a number of issues. These are questions that we would like to ask, but we would like you to give us the answer so that we can write our report. These questions are faced by the 2 bureaus. And how are you going to handle these issues about buses, minibuses, and other stakeholders' vehicles? The stakeholders have their interests, and we need to consider overall public interest. In relation to report number 59, value for money, this question had been indirectly asked. But since you have raised this point, can you give us a paper on how you are going to answer those questions asked by Mr. Zhe and also questions you just raised? I would like you to give us the answers so that before we write up our report, we can study your answers. And then the matter will be referred to the 2 panels to see whether they need to meet and discuss the related policies and to see how the overall environmental pollution problem can be solved. So that's our responsibility. So we need to look forward. We need to look ahead and see how these problems can be solved. We will refer the issues to the relevant panels. Thank you, Paul. Next, Chan Ha-kan. Chairman, thank you. I would like to follow up Mr. Zhe's questions. Page 14, Table 2. If we take an overall view of the 4 subsidy schemes, then in fact, for the taxi scheme, 90% was the take-up rate. In 2010, for diesel engines, only 10% of people participated in it. So in other words, at the beginning, 90% took part, but at the end, 90% didn't take part. The secretary just said that for taxi and minibus scheme, there is quite big incentive because the operating environment would be improved. So this point is understandable. But if we look at the 2007 and 2010 schemes for diesel vehicles, there are a lot of opportunities for the government to review or optimize these schemes. In 2007, when the scheme was introduced, there was one extension. So in other words, there's a chance for review. And in 2010, there was another chance to review the scheme. At that time, when the administration reported on this scheme to the environment panel, members and the trade gave a lot of views. Why is it that people didn't accept money paid by the government to replace vehicles? Because there are different factors. First, the subsidy is not enough, and the grant could not offset the then inflation rate or the foreign exchange difference. The trade and the panel gave a lot of views. So why didn't the administration take on board these views to optimize the schemes, to encourage more people to replace the vehicles? But on the contrary, the take-up rate had been so low. Who would take the question? Mr. Mok. Thank you, Chairman. We had some discussions just now. If we just increase the grants, if there is no suppression measures, this is not desirable. In 2008, we recommended to LegCo about an increase of the license fee, but we did not get members' support at that time. If we only increase the grants without any suppression measures, then there won't be big participation in these schemes. Chairman, at that time, the Council discussed measures about license fee increase. Of course, that would not be welcomed. Why is it that you always want to punish people instead of offering a bigger carrot? At that time, members of the trade said that if you are willing to increase the grant, they are willing to replace the vehicles. So why weren't you willing to do that at that time? It's difficult to determine the situation at that time. Secretary, can you dig up the minutes of that relevant meeting for us to write report? Because I think they have to consider the use of public funds, because we are talking about grants with public funds. So I think it's easy to comment, but when they spend public funds, they have to make explanation. So I think we should be fair to them. If we just ask them about the situation at that time, well, many officials were not there at that time, and we should now consider the issue from the policy's point of view. Okay, Anissa? I want to add 2 points. Well, it's still at 18%, but then the amount of grants is based on the average price of similar new models. So if there is change in market price, it will be reflected in the amount of the grant. Chairman, as you said, now the 2010 scheme is underway. Well, in 2007, there were 2 grant percentages, 12% and 18%. The older the vehicles, the smaller will be the grants. And then when it comes to Euro 2, we recommended 18% grant. So we would like to offer a more attractive grant. Of course, if we keep increasing the grants without any suppression measures, then the result may not be an encouragement for vehicle owners to replace vehicles. They would think that perhaps next time the grants will even be bigger. So this is not the most effective use of public funds. So we want to keep the grant schemes. At the same time, we must introduce some control measures. As our secretary said, there must both be carrots and stick in order to meet the policy objectives. But before that, there must be consensus and support from society. Perhaps I will ask Mr. Cheung to take your question. The Environment Bureau just talked about the carrot, and let's now ask the Transport Bureau to talk about the stick. Mr. Porter also asked a question on this point. Chairman, from the policy perspective, I think it's the Environment Bureau who is taking the lead. And we do agree that between the 2 bureaus, there must be more policy cooperation. I don't know whether members are aware. The Environment Bureau, the Transport and Housing Bureau and the Development Bureau have regular meetings. Recently, we talked about how to improve air quality. And just now, the Environment Bureau colleague talked about that. If we want to offer bigger carrots, and if there is no stick, then the result may not be effective. Besides, we have to look at how much the supply of that type of vehicles is. Otherwise, the effectiveness will be affected. For the Transport and Housing Bureau, as set out in the audit report, and within the government, we admitted that power generation vehicles, vessels will affect air quality. And when it comes to vehicles, certainly this is related to the Transport Bureau, the Transport Department, and Marine Department. Now, Secretary, can you now focus on vehicles, and we will deal with vessels later on. The audit report stated or talked about the reorganization of bus routes. So in the future, we will enhance our work in this area. Thank you, Chairman. I don't want to talk about the increase of grants. In fact, I want to say that there is room to optimize the schemes.
I accept the reply from the Permanent Secretary. Mr. Chairman, well, what about the vacuum period? Mr. Chairman, I'd like to follow up on Ms. Anissa Wong, Professor Anthony Cheung, and Ms. Christine LOH's replies, because they all said that control measures would still be coming. It's now mandatory that diesel vehicles more than 15 years old have to be replaced. I think the administration has to consider whether or not there are sufficient vehicles in the market. Now, from Table 2, you can see that about 30,000 diesel vehicles are still running on our roads. If we are to mandatorily eliminate these vehicles, the administration has to seriously consider whether there are sufficient new vehicles in the market. Otherwise, you'll only be adding to the burden of the industry. I wonder if the administration has a very urgent and mandatory plan to require such a replacement, or whether they would adopt a rather relaxed and lenient approach. Well, Mr. Wong, we've already set a timetable for air quality improvement targets. That is, by 2020, what targets we should attain, and so forth. Now, basically, these targets are baselines, and then our future measures will target roadside vehicles. That's a key issue. Say by 2015 we want to attain a certain AQO, then we'll work out a timetable for gradually eliminating the substandard vehicles. And we'll also have a timetable to attain the 2020 indicators. But we'll have to give sufficient and reasonable time to the industry to eliminate the vehicles. So we have to strike a balance. Well, Secretary, if you want to attain your targets in 2020, how many buses have to be replaced? If they don't replace them, what will happen? We would like to know the stick. Now that we know the carrot. So you must tell us what measures will be adopted to attain your targets. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for us to write our report. I don't want to examine this issue in a very vague manner. It's basically impossible. Well, Mr. Chairman, we're still considering concrete policies and measures. Perhaps I should defer to our colleague, Andrew. Mr. Chairman will target 3 types of commercial vehicles, LPG taxis and PLBs. As the catalytic converters are under repair, we'll have a one-off grant scheme to subsidize about 20,000 vehicles. And then, for remote control by the roadside, we would step up control to reduce roadside pollution by PLBs and taxis. At present, we have 5,800 franchised buses that are not yet retrofitted. So upcoming, we'll have a peak. 3,000 new buses will be commissioned. That will be very helpful in terms of roadside pollution. And for Euro 2 and 3 franchised buses, we still have about 3,000 of them. In the past year, we liaised with the 2 franchised bus companies to experiment on selective catalytic converters. Well, if a bus is not to be replaced because it's rather expensive and may have a fair implication. So we would like to borrow assistance from science and technology. So if we can have a catalytic converter, the emission can be reduced by 60%. The experiment is nearing its end. Apparently, we'll be able to attain our target. We're now coordinating with the 2 bus companies to conclude our experiments. If the scheme turns out to be successful, we'll report the progress to the Environmental Affairs Panel and then seek funding from the FC for retrofitting these buses with the converters. And then the emission level can be improved by 2 tiers. Euro 2 will be equivalent to U4. Euro 3 will be equivalent to Euro 5 in terms of emission level. That's a very cost-effective solution. As for the other diesel commercial vehicles, as the Secretary said, we're now analyzing views received and experimental results. If we have an effective measure to expedite the elimination program in terms of incentives and control, we would like to examine what can be done. As the Secretary said, we of course have to understand the acceptance of the industry in terms of replacement of vehicles. We must have a practicable timetable. If we have a replacement program, we must set clear targets. If the administration is to subsidize diesel vehicle drivers to replace their vehicles, we have to work out when those vehicles will disappear. As quite many vehicles are involved, we are considering a phased program. The most polluting vehicle should be eliminated or replaced first, and we're drafting the details. Once we have a concrete plan, we'll immediately report to the LegCo. Chairman, can I ask a simple follow-up question on bus route rationalization? Well, maybe I should let Alan ask his question first. Alan? Mr. Chairman, I think we must say that we are rather shocked. Just now, Mr. Kenneth Leung pointed out that this is not the first time that we have an audit exercise. We have number 29 and 44 in 1997 and 2005, respectively. Chairman, of course, we agree that the LegCo is the frontliner and forerunner in monitoring the administration. In report number 44, it is said that the PAC, of course, with a different composition, expressed deep satisfaction on a number of conditions. That is, when the administration applied for funding to, well, they're asking for $1.2 billion for air quality improvement measures. The administration did not inform the LegCo that by reducing emission level, air quality might not be improved. And then we're also disappointed that in 2004, Mr. Chairman, I'm on R59 Info 58. For the overall RSP levels and nitrogen dioxide, they exceeded the indicators safety level by 45% and 26% respectively. And in 2002 to 2004, such figures were continuously rising. For nitrogen dioxide, it has a huge impact on air quality. In Chapter 1 of the report, Chairman, I think you still remember that. Nitrogen dioxide seriously affects our health, leads to respiratory system diseases, and reduce the development of our lung functions. That's very important. Now, for report number 59, when compared with 2005, our scheme has been in place for 7 years. Now, if you read figure 3, you'll see that we're exceeding the limits by even more than what's in 2005. 20 milligram per cubic meters. But we seriously fall short of that target by more than 50%. If you read report number 40 from 2005, the substandard is by 26% only, and now it's 51%, so it's rather shocked. So, Mr. Chairman, of course, I have many questions. Just now, a number of members have already asked this question. I'd like to follow up. We have 2 secretaries here from the Environment Bureau and the Transport and Housing Bureau. Well, Mr. Paul Chan from the Development Bureau is absent today. According to Professor Anthony Cheung, the 3 of them have frequent meetings. Now, even after 25 years, we're unable to tackle the NO2 problem. It is useless for you to frequently discuss the matter. Now, when the Civic Party met with C.Y. Leung, we said, in fact, we raised this 3 years ago, we asked that all buses be converted to Euro 5 because you would gain a big applause because NO2 would immediately drop. Now, for the 3-person meeting, did you discuss the issue? If so, what problems are there? From 1997 to 2005 to 2012, we saw no progress. Rather, the situation has deteriorated. We now have even more serious NO2 emission. All right, let's not look back. Let's be more forward-looking. How can we prevent history from recurring? Now, we're talking to the executive, which has turned a deaf ear to our views. I'm talking about NO2. I'd like to focus on NO2. Secretary, if Mr. Leong is targeting NO2, I believe the Environment Bureau will respond. Well, you can tell us in a moment whether your 3-person meeting had discussed this issue. You mentioned the 3-person meeting or the tripartite meeting between the 3 bureaus. Mr. Chairman, concerning environment and transport matters, as I said, the 3 bureau directors have regular meetings because when we want to launch a policy, very often we need support from other bureaus. Air quality is, of course, a concern for all the 3 bureaus. And just now, the Undersecretary, Ms. Christine LOH, also mentioned that more economic incentives would be required for the public transport operators and private vehicle owners. But as she said, at the same time, there must be sticks to match incentives. For franchised bus companies, the problem is also there because the replacement cost is high. And as said just now, for the government, we have to strike a balance in the use of public money. Our proposals must be cost-effective, and the administration is preparing the schemes. Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm not being disrespectful to the Bureau Director. Perhaps I did not ask my question well enough. Well, let me focus a little bit more. When the 2 Bureau Directors met, did they examine air pollution, in particular roadside pollution, and knew that the main source of pollution was NO2? Were the 3 of them united in this aspect? Was there any solidarity among themselves, or they operated independently? Well, maybe one bureau would like to reduce the number of bus routes, and then some said that the Environment Bureau should get more funding. The other said that the TH Bureau should get more funding. Blah, blah, blah. Now, when the 3 of them sat together, were the conflicts among them manifested, or were they united in combating air pollution? Can I have a specific answer? Well, Mr. Chairman, I would be more focused. I think it's the latter. That is, we are united on this front. I won't say that we are trying to attack any enemy, but in terms of air quality, it's a matter of urgency for us. Of course, the 3 bureaus have a division of work. Environment affairs are dealt with by the Environment Bureau, but the other 2 bureaus also have a role to play. For THB, when it comes to vehicles and public transport, we'll definitely discuss with industry to gain their support as far as possible. If there are too many vehicles on our road and polluted air is exceeding our limits, say in terms of NO2, the THB will study more transport impact. But of course we have to take into account passenger needs. I don't think there are conflicts. We work together. Mr. Wong, are you going to supplement? Well, I'd like to thank Mr. Leong for his question, which is a good one. Of course, different policy bureaus have different concerns. But in terms of improving air quality, I believe we are united. Together with the people of Hong Kong, we would like to be concerned about the issue and would like to make improvements. The issue does not just involve the 3 bureaus, but the whole community. So we'll work together. In fact, we've made some improvement in terms of air pollution. But I agree that in the past, NO2 emission levels have been rising rather than dropping, and we have to make further improvement. And across the bureaus, we are now considering possible solutions. I defer to Ms. Anissa Wong. A couple of supplements, Mr. Chairman. All along, for environmental affairs, we attached much importance to air quality, and we've been working very hard. And all along, for roadside air quality, earlier concerns were about particulates, microparticulates, as indicated in the report. Roadside concentration of particulates is rather high when compared with other cities. But in terms of concentration, it has dropped by 33% already. So in fact, we've done something and will continue to work hard. Why is it that roadside air quality has been deteriorating? At the last meeting, we pointed to a number of problems with old vehicles and municipal structure as well as ozone concentration have caused particulates to change to NO2. As for roadside, NO2 level is unsatisfactory. We introduced to Audit a number of improvement measures. We introduced LPG vehicles and retrofit Euro 2 and Euro 3 franchised buses. In order to totally replace franchised buses, the operators have already got a plan. It was explained just now that starting from next year, the number of franchised buses will be to be replaced will be expedited. 17 years old is the threshold. By 2017, over 3,000 franchised buses will be replaced. When compared with the total 5,800 odd is a rather high percentage. So if you consider retrofitting for Euro 2 and Euro 3 buses, you see that we've actually been working on roadside air quality. There's a third part to the question. As our colleagues and the bureau directors said just now, franchised bus companies have a scheduled program for replacement and retrofitting. But for the other vehicles, they don't have such a plan. So long as a vehicle is fit for running on our roads, it's not necessary to replace the vehicle. So on this, do we also need a deadline for replacement or retrofitting? We'll study in detail with the other bureaus on various details. And when the plan matures, we'll come to the LegCo to introduce the plan to you.
I would like to remind our speakers to not repeat themselves because it would just lengthen the meeting time. When you read the audit report, how do they arrive at the figure of upgrading 3,000 odd buses? By 2019, they'll only upgrade 2,641 vehicles. So I'd like to ask, where do they get these figures? How do they get 3,000 vehicles? Not even by 2019. Is this figure incorrect? You can respond later. When you refer to paragraph 2.28, that is just Euro 2. And so Euro 1 figures are not included. If you include Euro 1, it would exceed 3,000 vehicles. So you can confirm, is that correct? The Transport Department can confirm, yes. Well, it's still a serious problem. If you refer to page 15, figure 2, well, there are a lot of Euro 1, Euro 2 vehicles. I don't know how many of them are buses. Some of them are not buses. At least it will help me understand that paragraph 2.28 is correct. We still have pre-Euro and Euro 1 buses. That's why we have 3,000 odd buses. So coming back to this, just now, Mr. Lai says there is a catalyst, a selective catalyst. So if this selective catalyst is so efficient, can take Euro 2 to Euro 4, Euro 3 to Euro 5 standards, then that means we don't need to purchase Euro 5 vehicles. Should you clarify a little bit? So Euro 2 to Euro 4, Euro 3, Euro 5, are you referring to only certain emissions? Otherwise, nobody would manufacture Euro 5 vehicles. Thank you, Chairman. The selective catalyst focuses on carbon emissions. If you look at other emissions, of course, the reduction rates are different. So ultimately, the best solution is to upgrade the fleet. So colleagues have asked a similar question. In page 14, 15, table 2 and figure 2, the most polluting are Euro 1 and pre-Euro vehicles, so they make up 44%. So one of the two vehicles, commercial vehicles that is, the high polluting sources. In table 2, so besides the successful diesel taxi scheme, where we only have 2 remaining diesel taxis, the others are failures. And I'm totally dissatisfied with the previous answer. They wanted to increase the license registration, and members were objecting to that. At the inquiry stage, this is the stick. When the carrot is insufficient, then we will need to increase the use of the stick. So what we're asking now is, why can't you increase its incentives, make the carrot larger, such that the council will be satisfied? But you're not responding. You're saying, we are calling for a stick, and you're not granting that. So how do you come about these figures, 10%? Just now, Mr. Cheung answered in part. The government will, how firm is it? You have fixed public funds. Where you deploy it is important. There are priorities. So you're saying, I'm going to draw the line at 18, that's the size of the carrot? Then we'll hand you the stick. So, of course, in part 1 of the inquiry, we had said we had unhappy experience in the previous session when we asked the EPD secretary to deal with the buses. He said that was a transport housing secretary issue. When we asked Tian Yui, she said it was Edward Yao's problem portfolio, the Environment Bureau's. But at that time we didn't have this 3-person meeting. Now we have the 3-secretary meeting. So so does that mean that we won't have this buck passing around anymore? So can we now have high expectations where the 3 secretaries work together? Will they be invincible? So can we expect in our next policy address a resounding consensus amongst the secretaries that there will be an improvement in air quality? So, Mr. Mok, could you respond? There has been some discussion on the incentive issue. I also want to point out that these vehicles are aged, especially Euro 1, pre-Euro vehicles. We also have a polluter pay principle. So besides this being a use of public funds, the vehicle owners, when their vehicles age, they have a responsibility of replacing them. So after balancing so many factors, the subsidy proposed is reasonable. In the past, the industry also felt that before the scheme was implemented, could the government reduce their first registration tax to encourage them to upgrade the fleet? That had been mentioned before. The subsidy we propose 12%, 10%, 18% is similar. So we feel that subsidy in the use of public funds and polluter paying principle and encouraging, we feel that it is suitable. You can respond to Alan's second question. I think we agree on a few areas that there should be user paying principle, and taxis are easy to deal with. For old diesel vehicles, it's a very wide fleet, from buses and coaches. They encompass a wide variety of vehicles. The business environment has deteriorated. The public's expectations for health have increased. So given this mixture, we need to have a comprehensive review. We need to also enhance communication within the different bureaus. To answer Mr. Alan Leung, I am positively optimistic. I'm not aware of what occurred in the previous regime, but in our current regime, the secretaries are mutually complementary. From transport housing, I focus on reducing traffic congestion, maintaining traffic flow. I also need to ensure that when they accept public transport service, their health is not affected. If the overall air quality in Hong Kong is so poor, then we would not pass a lot of environmental assessment tests. So even though the three secretaries work together, it doesn't mean that we're invincible. We have to work together to overcome challenges. I need to have it on record that Mr. Cheung and Mr. Wong have a positive response, and we appreciate this response. Regarding Mr. Cheung Bing-lao, saying the executive and legislative arm need to work together. Well, Mr. C.Y. Leung doesn't seem to respect the Legislative Council, but we do want to assist the Environment Bureau, the Transport Housing Bureau, and Development Bureau, because in Audit Report 59, the PAC feels that the government needs to catch up. The legislature, the pro-government camp, is also pushing for cleaner air, so they shouldn't be concerned about the legislature. It's now, the ball is now in the executive arms court. I would also like to follow up the subsidy schemes. In 07, you had only deployed some 30% of the funds and you stopped. Now you're working on Euro 2. So can you have a more flexible arrangement? The 07 Euro 1 scheme, could you reactivate that? Why are you so rigid? We gave you 3.176 billion. That's the audit report, paragraph 2.8c. You only used the 700 million, less than a quarter. Could you reactivate this scheme so we might be able to upgrade more Euro 1 vehicles? We won't have to inhale so many particulates at the roadside level. Chairman, the Finance Committee approved the funds and we deployed them accordingly. If Mr. Leung says that some 3 billion was approved and only some 700 million was used, I can tell you I'll support that if you... the question was, why did you use so little of the funds? Some 3 billion was approved. Chairman, a member had asked and they had also responded. I think we already have an answer. They will just repeat themselves. Well, we have to be fair in our report. I'll ask you another time. So I need to give you ample opportunity to respond. You have to answer to society. I'll give them another chance to respond. So the chairman has given you the last chance. The LegCo had approved 3,176 million for upgrading the fleets. I had explained at the time, before it was introduced or during it was introduced, we did a lot of communication with the industry, and according to the industry's suggestions, when the scheme ended, we had fine-tuned the scheme. Some industry members said they had purchased new vehicles and they could not make the deadline to install the devices. It was a voluntary scheme, and by the time the scheme ended, we had used some 772 million. We had learned from that experience, so in the future when we deal with old vehicles, we need, other than incentives, we need other measures to be more effective. But when we approved the 3 billion, you had explained that you could do the job and it would improve the environment, and it was on those grounds that the funds were approved. Otherwise the government wouldn't have approved the funds. The funds could have been used in other areas to improve. We're not questioning we're saying that by granting you 3 billion, the funds were not able to be used in other areas, and there was an opportunity loss. So you have not done your job, and I would like you to hear from you. You were given 3 billion. How did you come up with that figure? You did consultation. you sought the funding, but you have to explain why weren't you able to use those funds? Society had lost out. Could you explain? We need to provide details in our report. It's not about carrots and sticks. Why weren't you able to reach your goal? The first voluntary scheme, we had sought some 3.1 billion. The budget, it was the first run, and we looked at the number of vehicles, the ex gratia funds available. So if all qualified vehicles were to take part, it would exceed 3.1 billion. And as we explained, it was a voluntary scheme. So for various reasons, only about some 30% of owners took part. But in our second round of voluntary upgrading, we had learned from this experience. So when we targeted Euro 2 diesel vehicles in our funding exercise, we didn't expect 100% participation. We had forecast some 30% of vehicle owners would take part based on our initial experience.
So when we applied for funding, we have learned and drawn a conclusion in making some adjustments. So when we prepared the budget, we wanted to be more practical. But then on the first occasion, we did not have enough experience, so we adopted a safer approach. We assumed that if 100% of the vehicle owners would take part in the scheme, then the amount of funding required would be that amount. Alan, in order to have clearer records, I want to take note of the point that the Director of Environmental Protection said that with the support of LegCo, she would be willing to make arrangement such that the amount of funding that was not used in the 2007 scheme would be resought when they present another funding application from LegCo. So I hope that this is going to be a forward-looking arrangement. Secretary, do you agree with Alan? Chairman, as our colleagues explained, at that time, the take-up rate was lower than expected at that time. This point was made already. I won't repeat it. Based on the administration's resource allocation system, yes, we should be forward-looking. If we have a new proposal or new scheme, we hope to learn from our experience. We discussed a lot about carrot and stick just now. We have to look at our overall financial requirements to ask for funding and policy support from LegCo members. Just now, Mr. Leung wanted the administration to be active and proactive. And is it true that we should work based on 3.7 billion minus 700 million? I don't know whether that's Mr. Leung's point. No. Perhaps I did not express myself clearly. That's not what I mean. I'm not trying to limit the amount of funding that you should seek. I just want to say that for pre-Euro and Euro 1 model, can you introduce another grant scheme? Okay, so we should be focused on policies. Yes, we have to have this point recorded, because in the process, I heard some officials saying that we are now in Euro 2. It's not fair to work on pre-Euro and Euro 1 model. And I don't understand why this is unfair to those who have already replaced their vehicles. If that's what the director said, then that's good. She will seriously consider my suggestion. Okay, the point is taken, Alan. All right, thank you. My last point. Mr. MOK just said that the carrot is that big, about 12% or 18% of the vehicle price. I won't blame him because the director is a professional technocrat. But should we fix the rate at 12% or 18%, then it is up to Mr. Zhang, Mr. Chen, and Ms. Wong, or Mr. Wong to decide. I must remind you, secretaries, that you may be achieving some savings here, but then the money will be spent in hospitals. Ms. Christine LOH said very clearly, well, 430,000 people were hospitalized. Yes, if you refer to the report, now the air quality is so bad, many people died. And if you refer to the air quality objectives for 2014, 2.12A, if we achieve the air quality objectives for 2014, then in Hong Kong every year, we can reduce around 4,200 hospitalizations, and the number of life years, the reduction in the number of life years lost will be 7,000 odd years. So if we spend more money to raise 12% or 18% to like 35%, then we are just reallocating the money. Do you want people to be hospitalized, or do you want to offer a bigger carrot so that vehicle owners are willing to replace their vehicles? This is up to the Leung Chun-ying administration to choose. I cannot say on behalf of the PAC, but to me, I would rather money be spent earlier so that people don't need to be hospitalized. We don't want people to receive medical treatment in hospitals. I think LegCo, or at least the Civic Party, will give you full support. Thank you, Alan, for your comments. We will write our report after our internal discussion. Mr. Ng Kam-sing, after you speak, we will take a break for 5 minutes. Okay. Whenever we talk about emission control or pollution, I think what Mr. Leung said in his final remarks was very valid. People can work healthily in early age, but then later on they need to spend money to buy back their health. Now we are in the latter stage. Our society has been working hard to make money. Then now, how can we improve health so that people can enjoy longer lives? I think this is what our society and the government needs to be focused on. Talking about 3.176 billion of funding, did the government do anything to lengthen lives in investing 3.1 billion to reduce emission so as to achieve social benefits in extending people's lives and reducing the number of days of medical treatment? Did the government do this kind of assessment? Just now we wanted to understand more about why a bigger carrot cannot be offered. We're talking about 3.1 billion of worth of carrots, and how can the money be used to lengthen people's lives? Did the government do a good assessment? The Audit Department talked about an accurate estimate of utilization rate. If there is a good policy and measure, then at the end of the day, we should have achieved the estimated utilization rate of the 3.1 billion. So, did the administration do a very accurate study? And is it true that this study needs to be further improved on? Who will take this question? Mr. Mok. Thank you, Chairman. When we introduced the 2007 grant scheme, we did not do a health assessment, but we realized that the roadside air pollution problem was serious, so we thought of additional measures to improve roadside air quality. The problem rests with the particulates and nitrogen oxides. And if you talk about the pre-Euro and Euro 1 vehicles, there must be ways to retire them earlier. Because of this, we did not do a health assessment because there are already enough reasons to introduce the scheme, to seek funding approval from LegCo to phase out those vehicles. Thank you, Chairman. The expected take-up rate for that scheme was 70%, but the actual take-up rate was 24% only. So the discrepancy is 1/3. So there is such a big gap. So given this big gap, is it merely because there was not enough incentive? What are the reasons behind this big gap? And, well, eventually, there was only 1/3 take-up rate. Mr. Mok, thank you, Chairman. Because this is a voluntary grant scheme, when we estimated the funding requirement, because we wanted to play safe, we assumed all vehicle owners would take part. In the middle of the scheme, we kept monitoring the participation rate of the scheme. On one hand, we encouraged the eligible vehicle owners to use the grants to replace their vehicles. On the other hand, we tried to examine the reasons. So as we said just now, in 2008, in the midst of the scheme, we proposed to LegCo that if we only relied on the grants, we might not be able to achieve the expected objectives, so we needed additional measures. We already presented all those points. I won't repeat them. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Leung-sing, Para 2.11. Just now, some colleagues also raised a point from that paragraph concerning installation of emission reduction devices. If LPG is used, according to your definition, in Info 28, from report number 44, if PM from LPG emission should be negligent, and nitrogen oxides will be reduced by 75 to 85% as compared to diesel vehicles. So the use of LPG will be very good. However, if it is used, even if it is used, there is the need for emission reduction devices. And if emission reduction devices are not installed properly, then there will be 10 times of nitrogen oxide emission. So this is the point. Because the emission reduction device needs to be replaced once every 18 months. And if they're all used in LPG taxis and minibuses, then in the future, will you have adequate means to monitor this. Otherwise, if there is any unsatisfactory installation, then there will be even bigger harm. In April 2010, $150 million was approved. And do you have some estimates of the expected take-up rate and the effects, Mr. MOK? Yes. We expect that in the future, when the LPG taxi and minibus owners replace their vehicles, the participation or take-up rate would be very high, because after doing the installation for them at roadside, we will install detection devices. If there is excessive emission, then we will ask the vehicle owners to repair their vehicles within a specified time period. Otherwise, their licenses will be revoked. Because of such control measures, the take-up rate would definitely be high. We used to help pre-Euro diesel vehicle owners to install PM reduction devices. Without that device, in the future, upon renewal of license, the Transport Department will renew their licenses. With such control measure, the take-up rate almost reached 100%. So with suppression measures, the take-up rate of this kind of schemes is very high. Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Langsing, then is it true that you will inspect all vehicles, or you will just inspect some vehicles, Mr. MOK? At different locations, we will install roadside remote detection devices. So when the vehicles pass those locations, the emission condition will be detected. Now, taxis have rather high mileage, and so usually once every 18 months, their devices will have to be replaced. And taxis usually travel everywhere. So based on our past experience, we will be able to inspect all taxis within a short period of time because they travel everywhere. We set those detection devices at different locations. The monitoring effects will be quite good. Chairman, can you answer my question? Will you inspect all vehicles instead of only a random sampling inspection? Chairman, I already explained just now. Concerning our roadside detection, when vehicles pass the locations, we can see them. So we are not doing any sampling. We can see whether there is excessive emission when they pass those sensors. So in other words, you can check all the vehicles. So can you handle the situation when you detect the problem? Yes. Let me explain how those devices operate. Now at roadside, we will install a remote device. When a vehicle passes that sensor, then we will detect whether there is excessive emission. When there is excessive emission, we will notify the vehicle owner. Of course, we'll check whether the devices are functioning properly. Whenever there is exceedance, we will notify the vehicle owner. Yes, that point is very important. Even if you're able to monitor, you have to make sure that you can handle the problem. And if you can notify the vehicle owners right away, then they can take actions immediately, and you can also take follow-up actions. Then we will feel more assured. Then if you refer to page 4 about engineering projects, C, for engineering projects, in 2012, in January, EXCO approved a few initiatives. I think these are worth commendation. In January, there are 22 improvement measures, and I'm referring to government projects. Do they include also the building of housing or repair of roads or slopes, or there may be some non-government works? There will be emission from housing projects or housing construction. I'm referring to a meeting in January. Do you have enough information on these projects? And concerning monitoring of pollution or emission, do you have some ways of monitoring to make sure that in the future, when the new air quality objectives are implemented, you'll be able to monitor the situation? Who will take the question? Andrew? I think Mr. Kam-sing is concerned about this. Now, in January this year, EXCO approved that we should adopt new air quality objectives based on the WHO standards. And we need legislative amendment for that, so these objectives can only be implemented in 2014. But then starting this year, for large-scale projects which require EIA, the evaluation criteria should be based on the new air quality objectives. So in other words, we are taking the lead to introduce more stringent air quality requirements to scrutinize the new projects to see whether the new air quality objectives can be met. So this has started this year. Even though the new air quality objectives have not been included in the legislation. Mr. Kam-sing, my last point, I'm happy to hear the government's response. I hope some information can be given to us so that we know how you are monitoring the situation. And after the standards are adopted, what kind of control measures have you put in place? Andrew, yes, this is okay, because our EIA mechanism is very open. So EIA projects that have been approved or not approved are publicized on the website. So if members are interested, we can give you the information.
Mr. Mok, when you answered Mr. Kam-sing's question about Mr. Leung's question on 4,200 hospitalization cases, I'd like to refer you to paragraph 10 of chapter 1. Did you do that actually? Well, let me clarify. Just now, Mr. asked about the 2007 grant scheme. In paragraph 10, mentioned by the chairman, new AQIs were formulated. That's in 2010. That is, with the new AQIs were promulgated, 19 air improvement measures were announced at the same time. Are you talking about 2014? Yes, but just now his question was about 2007. Mr. Leung asked you a question to explain the origin of paragraph 10, so thank you for your explanation. Let's take a break of 10 minutes. Perhaps we can finish today's meeting a bit earlier, maybe at 12 o'clock or 12:15. And then on Monday afternoon at 2:30 p.m. we can continue. Officials, do you agree? Agree? All right. Maybe 12 to 12:15 we can suspend our meeting. Thank you.